I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and here's what I'm watching. What China calls its constructive engagement in foreign affairs, a transformation of China's foreign policy from largely reactive, protecting China's parochial interests, to confidently proactive, interacting robustly on all matters of global importance, diplomacy, economics, ecology, culture, science, and technology. One way to appreciate China's change is to compare constructive engagement with China's past primary principle of non-interference. In fact, non-interference remains sacrosanct in that China does not seek to change the political structure of other countries, but non-interference now is more a guardrail than the primary principle. As China moves to center stage of the world, in President Xi Jinping's words, China can leverage its national strengths and capabilities, applying Chinese wisdom and Chinese solutions to address the problems in countries or regions that share complementary interests with China. The Belt and Road Initiative, constructing infrastructure in developing countries, exemplifies China's constructive engagement. The underlying theory of constructive engagement is that there should be a new way for addressing foreign policy and security concerns that differs radically from the two extremes of isolation and intervention. While China recognizes that constructive engagement is part of its responsibility as a major power to contribute to the global commons, China is not performing acts of charity. Promoting global stability and development is entirely in China's national interest. No country is more dependent on international trade, and no country is more vulnerable to global crises. Moreover, as developing countries grow their markets and increase their trade, China can diversify its international commerce, becoming less reliant on the US and Europe, where politics can interfere. But in these new waters, China will not find the sailing smooth. On the one hand, some Western media criticize China as a free rider in global affairs, and on the other hand, China's Belt and Road is criticized as its initiative to reshape the world, if not in China's image, then for China's benefit. It's beyond the scope of this commentary to address such concerns, although there is no question that developing countries welcome China's world-leading experience in building much-needed infrastructure. As China increases its constructive engagement, other countries will push back. China must be ready to deal with such resistance in sophisticated ways, making mid-course corrections as needed and promoting its new kind of global governance with subtlety. I'm keeping watch. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn.
Joining me in studio for an analysis on the growing China-Africa relationship is Dr. Patrick Maluki, a lecturer at the University of Nairobi's Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies. Dr. Maluki, thank you for joining us. So, China and Africa have enjoyed strong relations over the years, and they're committed to strengthen these relations even further. We've heard from China saying it's willing to mediate in the various flashpoints in the continent. How much of a boost will this be to Africa?
Yes, it's true. China and Africa have had cordial relations for quite some time, and Africa has now found an alternative to the Western source of support for development projects and other governance issues. So deepening Africa-China relations would really be a major boost to African development agenda.
And speaking of development agenda, we wouldn't speak about that without talking about infrastructure development. And we've seen a lot more countries in Africa now concentrating on this and benefiting as a result of their ties with China. What impact has it had on the continent so far?
I think it's big impact because I think the infrastructural institutions that have been put up using Chinese assistance are very feasible. In Kenya, we have the Thika superhighway. You know, in South Sudan, China is there. In Sierra Leone, they are putting in the national airport. And I think this is what has been lacking in Africa. And so this is really boosting Africans' development.
Right. And where do you see these relations in the next few years?
Believe you me, in my own opinion, this is going to to strengthen, it's going to grow. There's a lot of China-Africa relations, especially in the academy, in issues dealing with the peacekeeping. And so there's great future in Africa-China relations. And we really appreciate what China is doing in this continent.
But there's also been critics who say this is not a win-win cooperation for Africa. You know, what would you say to those kinds of critics? Right.
It may not be a win-win initially, but what China is doing, which is different from what the West has been doing, is putting in place infrastructural development, which has been lacking in Africa. So when we have expanded airports, when we have roads network, we have railways, those railways these are actually serving Africans. And therefore, the reason why we are not win-win is because African economies are still weak, but they are developing, they are growing. So with the time, I think Africa will be able to reap better results from relation with China.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, picking on, you're saying African economies need to grow, and there's those who've said that from this cooperation, there are lessons that African governments can learn from China. What would be some of those lessons that you would talk about?
One is efficiency, because whenever a Chinese farm has been given work to do, we can see that done in real time. I mean, at the University of Nairobi, we have the University Towers, which was built in a record 2 years. There's a huge building. It has provided office space for the lecturers, and therefore efficiency is one. And secondly is commitment. You know, when you say you are doing something, you do it. China has really managed to deal with governance challenges, especially aspects of corruption, you know, which has really affected a lot of service delivery in Africa. So we have a lot to learn from China.
We do indeed.
Yes.
Thank you very much for those insights. We had here in studio Dr. Patrick Maluki of the University of Nairobi's Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies.